Well, firstly, to thank Deborah and UKZN Press in this age where it's difficult to get your stuff published. I think Deborah and Adele and the team have really gone out of their way, and we've had some fantastic launches in Durban especially, and with people from Chatsworth, in Chatsworth, great parties. And I think sometimes that's what book launches should be, is that after you spend the many years writing, you just have to have a party. And that's what it's been with UKZN Press, and thank you so much for that. And thanks to you, Jay, for this incredible launch. To think that we could have something like this in Johannesburg at UJ really touches us. So, many people have asked, how do you write about a township that is 450,000 people, that's been in existence for 50 years? How do you capture it? How you put in things, how you don't leave out things? And it's always a very difficult thing. So my mother, I gave her the book, she's 81, and I got home and she had thrown the book on the floor, and she said, "This is a rubbish book, it's rubbish." And I said, "Why, Ma?" She said, "You haven't mentioned the Valangani church, the Catholic church that your family's been involved in. You only mentioned the Pentecostals who are not real Christians." And then there were some Muslims who said, there just not enough Muslims in the book. And so you go on a downhill side. And then I went to a friend who owns a panel beater in a place called Overport. And he also said, "Oh, I don't like this book. You're only mentioning the South Indians. You haven't mentioned the North Indians." And so you can never write a total history of Soweto or Lenasia or Chatsworth. What you can do is to try and keep something in mind all the time. And it's a trick, really. But how do you do continuity and change? How do you think through a township that is moving and evolving, going backwards and forwards for 50 years by trying to have a sense of how things change and how they stay the same? And if you read the chapters in the book, that's what they try to give effect to. They're not romantic histories. Chatsworth is replete with gangsterism, is replete with drugs, is replete with poverty, is replete with racisms. But it's also replete with a sense of survival. It's replete with a sense of how people are trying to build a new South Africa. Not the pontifications from the top of social cohesion, or we all need to hold hands together and become a rainbow nation. It's people every day, Indian and African people, trying to build a life for themselves on the ground in new and unusual ways. And you'll see in this book that, especially in the school chapter, the chapter on the schools, how we try to capture how students, African students, are coming from outside Chatsworth, and the tensions and the problems and the coming togethers in ordinary everyday interactions in school life. So that's what you get out of the book. You get not a sense just of Chatsworth history. It's a sense of a history that is happening every day on the streets of South Africa. And that is why, in many senses, and it's got its sense that one thing that we didn't grasp in Chatsworth, and maybe it happens in every township, but it's really Chatsworthians gossip. They are the biggest gossipers you could ever imagine. And so when people want to do research, how wonderful to do research in a township where people gossip. Because this one lady, Sweetie, was telling us how great she was, and we were going to write this idealized version of Sweetie's life, until we came out and somebody told us, that auntie in the 70s, she ran a shebeen, and prostitutes and all. And that's not her child, that's somebody else's child, So, in a sense, gossip allowed us an entry into how people can make up biographies of themselves and even believe it sometimes. But it also gives you a snippet about what makes a township, the various influences, the various strands that come into being. And for many of us, you can take a snippet of a township, how food changes, for example, and you can tell a whole story of a township, that how people's names change over a period of time. And so in welcoming Dr. Betty Govindan, who has a long family history with Chatsworth, who is a critical reader, an academic that we all respect, and has a whole wonderful and colorful history. She has read the book and she has written about it, and she has a particular way of wanting to tell a story about the book. And so I really want to welcome Betty, and I just want to say to you people, because most of you are at universities, that Betty's own university history, and Sats Cooper, who's here, is what happened in Durban is that in the late 1950s, everybody went to Fort Hare if you were generally black, if you're not white. But at some stage they passed an act where they had universities for different tribal groups and for different racial groups. But they didn't know what to do in Durban with these mad coolies running around. They might protest and so on and upset the city. So they found an island in the middle of the harbor called Salisbury Island. And everyday students, believe it or not, in the 60s would take a ferry and go to the island and study there and take a ferry back. And there are few people here who had those experiences, and Betty has written powerfully about a university life on an island. And that's her formative years, and I really want to welcome her and thank her for coming from Durban to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin, and I'm honored to be here and to see so many of you, among them my daughter, Marilla, my cousin, Sylvia, and Benji Francis, who was also at Chatsworth, Professor Isabel Hofmeyer. We were colleagues in the old UDW, and of course, our Dr. Sats Cooper. Reading Chatsworth, The Making of a South African Township, I find I inhabit several time zones at once. I am transported to the time 5 decades ago. The nationalist government was on an intractable and seemingly irreversible course of separate development. Bantu education had been firmly secured as government policy earlier in 1952. The tribal colleges were being inaugurated all over the country, and soon some of us would be wending our way to Salisbury Island and other bush colleges. The homelands were caught in the carnivalesque of independence. Passive resistance and the defiance campaigns that blossomed in the first half of the 20th century were wilting in the face of the intransigence of the apartheid regime. The treason trial and the Rivonia trial landmarked the late 1950s and early 1960s, and Nelson Mandela would be sent to Robben Island for 27 years. How ironic to relive this history now, since Mandela's death, and realize that Mandela personifies that longue durée in our history, his tired body now in the deep sleep of death. And it was at this time, some 50 years ago, that Chatsworth came into being. The apartheid city is built on the principle of proximity and social distance. And this is the rationale for the location of Chatsworth on the perimeter of the city, or at the edge, as Ronnie Govender would say. In this, Chatsworth is similar to other well-known South African townships, such as Soweto and Alexandria, synonymous as they all are with apartheid's project of racist social engineering. As the editors Ashwin Desai and Ghulam Vahed point out, Chatsworth was born at the height of apartheid's madness, when the government sought to ghettoize persons of Indian origin into what it intended to be a frozen racial landscape. One of the unintended consequences of apartheid policies was the way a new sociological analysis of space, place, and people evolved and matured, as attempts to understand what was happening in these apartheid spaces emerged as an important and necessary critical endeavor. This new book on Chatsworth is a worthy addition to this burgeoning and established scholarship. In our readings of cities, both globally and locally, and in the autobiographical writings of a host of South African writers, such as Ellen Kuswayo on Soweto and Richard Reeve on District 6, to name just two, we have learned to appreciate that urban spaces are not inert backdrops. Urban spaces are actively produced by and in turn produce social processes. We have learned to appreciate that physical locations are theatres of living, where a range of elements mingle and interact. We have learned to read a place like Chatsworth as both a symbolic landscape as well as an embodied material landscape. Chatsworth, like its counterparts, is at once a metonymy for the larger history of divisiveness against apartheid and a testimony of resilience against this very apartheid. Indeed, this new anthology of stories, on Chatsworth with contributors from a wide range of fields, both locally and internationally. And the international scholars include those from Holland, Switzerland, Germany, Hong Kong, and Canada, tells of a dynamic and multifaceted world, a world transforming itself and mutating over the decades. We are reminded again and again that human beings are not automatons or robots, and that Chatsworth is a living, breathing landscape of people. Against the apartheid logic of homogenizing and ghettoizing racial groups and stultifying them by imposing residential proximity and corralling them, people are endlessly inventive and creative. In addition, diversity of language, class, ethnicity, and religion is not diminished, and if anything, flourishes. The notion of the tyranny of place, as posited by Mphahlele, where place is crucial in defining and constructing South African identities, is pertinent here. At the same time, there is every attempt to strain at the confining boundaries of such tyranny and claim wider life worlds beyond or even within the ghettos of confines of ghetto living. The approach that Ashwin and Ghulam use is both long-range and immediate, telescopic and microscopic, and with all the energy and creativity that animates this collection. Against the broad diachronic view of history, we have narratives immediate and in flesh and blood of individual actors, referred to as the synchronic, deep pasts and surface presence, the collective and the individual. We have fragments of biography and personal narrative, autobiographical microhistory, testimonies, fictional writing, all in a fine orchestration of divergent voices and exposing layer upon layer of the palimpsest that is Chatsworth. The variety of genres juxtaposed in the collection and their diverse themes exemplify Ali Mazroui's statement that Africa is not homogeneous, but a bazaar of people, some in between, some living inside, others living outside. The stories in this collection describe a wide array of people going about the business of making Chatsworth a habitable world. Some show the pain and trauma of uprooting and relocation, their lives the stuff of living history, living memory. Hannah Karim presents a poignant story of loss and nostalgia through her research with individuals who were removed through the group areas legislation from magazine barracks. The inheritance of loss might be an apt description of their plight, to use the title of Kieran Desai's Booker Prize novel. Others, like the renowned playwright Ronnie Govender, write evocatively of Ketamana, as he does in his story, The Story of Matambo. And I mentioned already Benji Francis, who moved from Ketamana to Chatsworth and then to Johannesburg. In those former places of abode, people were part of long-established, settled communities. They were then disturbed and uprooted, and the repositories and markers of their identity, temples and mosques, schools and community centers, were left behind. The old places became either ghostly remains of a past life, rich in culture and tradition, or strange islands in a sea of increasing dereliction. Yet, as Ronnie Govender prophesies in his story, in the new places of relocation, a resurgence of the human spirit is anticipated. And he writes, in the place of the intended ghetto, a phoenix is rising, and the community of Chatsworth is reclaiming the soul that the arbiters of human misery tried to destroy in places like Ketamana. Indeed, in the graphic stories of the iconic places of Chatsworth, such as the Temple of Understanding, the Arcade Khan Hospital, the Aryan Benevolent Home, all vying to be the signature of Chatsworth, we see Ronnie Govender's hopes in time coming to pass. Suryakanthi Chetty from the University of Johannesburg. Is she here?
Yes.
Yes. Where are you, Suryakanthi?
Well, she's here tonight.
Oh, okay. And Bobby Sinha, based in Brussels, present a compelling portrait of the Aryan Benevolent Home, showing how the APH was spawned in the reform and philanthropic movements of the 19th century, but developed into important South African self-help movements in their own right, global and transnational in its origins, yet uniquely South African in its concerns, and reinventing itself to this day since its inception in 1921. Exacerbating the debilitating psychological experience of relocation and removal were gross physical inequities as well, such as the lack of proper transport or organized sport. This is why the impossible stories of heroism emerging from Chatsworth, such as Judge Nicholson's moving narrative of the legendary golfer Papua Sugaram, is repeated and claimed over and over again. In this book, we see this resilience manifesting itself among a variety of people from different spheres of existence, whether priests or religious leaders, educational leaders, sportsmen, traders, fisherfolk, domestic workers, and those cadres keeping out of official view. The underground people, as Lewis and Corsi would say. The story of the flourishing of music in Chatsworth is told by Naresh Viren from a long line of musicians, and the remarkable story of the Denny Viren Music Academy recalls the monumental achievements of Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela in Soweto, and Shana Pillay, the Durban singer whose book Shadow People provides a portrait of Durban, District 6 and Sophia Town of the 1950s. The stories show again and again the human ingenuity that pervaded a place like Chatsworth, where, as David Copland noted of Soweto, a wasteland of oppression and neglect was humanized. It is not surprising that religious groupings rallied among themselves. The stories of the survival of Hinduism on rugged terrain, narrated by Brij Miraj, the establishment in this book of Islam and the work of leaders such as Maulana Dr. Abbas Khan, as told by Sultan Khan, and the phenomenal growth of Christian Pentecostalism, with leaders such as Dr. Paul Lachman, narrated by Karen Williamson and Ghulam Vahed, are compelling. And yes, Ashwin, your mother's absolutely right. When I read the book, I also looked for the story of the Catholic Church, Our Lady of the Valankani. And I must say you were redeemed, because there's one line about the Church of the Epiphany. And being Anglican, I was at least a little pleased. But with inroads into the traditional extended Indian family through the Group Areas Act, there are various other formations, including an array of civic organizations with all their joys as well as their fault lines. Finding psychic shelter in an alienating world is necessary and understandable, but also spawns tensions. We see competing forces at work as the contributors in their varied and different ways reveal not only continuities but ruptures in people's lives. Broader social processes and structural constraints from above intersect with internal divisions and constraints imposed from within and below. Within the family, for example, while the family might provide an inner sanctum in an otherwise alienating world, it can also be one of those deeply oppressive places. Tambisa Wechun shows in the wrenching account of Maria Machetti, whose husband was detained and held in solitary confinement during the apartheid years, the destructive impact this had on her family life. Wechun argues that the zones of domestic life are portrayed as non-political spaces of struggle, and that it is necessary to complicate the often triumphal narratives of family solidarity. We need to write women's hidden struggles, often locked away in the private space of the home, into the liberation narrative, as well as that which has generally been extolled as masculine political agency. And that you'll be happy to know that Neville Chunu, who's down for the African Literatures Association conference at Wits next month, said to me last night, it is time we wrote the story of Alimal Cooper, Ashwin's mother, Sats's mother. Chatsworth is presented then as both a site of social encounter and of social division. These tensions are also manifest through another blight on the social landscape, the prevalence of drugs, showing the social malaise that is just below the surface. As Ronnie Govender has written, Cater Manor has paid its penance. Chatsworth is still doing so. Chatsworth was and continues to be a smorgasbord of political activity, alongside the fearless struggles of extra-parliamentary resistance in the 1980s, chronicled by Ashwin in the collection, with the fighting spirit of activists such as Lenny Naidu, Kumi Naidu, Kovalan Naidu, and others. There was the work of the LACs and the pro-apartheid champions who grew tall by fighting for what should have been rightfully the people's rights and due anyway. Ashwin and Ghulam also explore what Chatsworth as a social space means today, more than 50 years after its formation and almost 2 decades after racial segregation had been dismantled as a formal policy. The overarching concern of this book is to examine what a space constructed as an Indian township by the apartheid government means half a century after it was established and almost 2 decades after apartheid has ended. The stories depict contestations and collaborations with the local state in the post-apartheid period. Wechun and Vahed in their chapter, Gender, Citizenship and Power, the Westcliff Flats Residents Association tell of the incredible agency of those who run the residents' associations, especially the women and the concerned citizens groups that preceded them, all of whom are in the forefront to coordinate struggles against housing, electricity, and water, given that these basic resources are now privatized. The problems of economic uncertainty remain. Penury and unemployment have deepened, as Ashwin has noted in his earlier book, The Pores of Chatsworth, Race, Class, and Social Movements in Post-Apartheid South Africa. The Pores for whom it is not yet Ururu. Ashwin and Ghulam and Vaichan and Ghulam in their contributions show the coming together of various racial groupings together with transnational migrants from other parts of Africa to fight social problems. Does this offer hope of a post-racial community or melting pot, they ask? The authors show that there is both unity and friction, camaraderie across racial borders alongside continuing and enduring dynamics of race and racial ideologies. The demolition of apartheid fences is at best uneven. Hardly the euphoria suggested in Simonier, we are one. In this study, in his study of Chatsworth, and I see the book is out there with ours, Thomas Bloom Hansen refers to the present state as a state and describes it as the melancholia of freedom, where, with the new democracy, there are also new uncertainties and anxieties that are experienced, as the old securities that were ironically buttressed by apartheid now dissipate. This is an echo, Melancholia of Freedom, of Louis Nkosi, who wrote before he died of the shattered psyches of the post-apartheid moment. Imran Kovadia is more direct and observes that we panic when the chariot of historical inevitability is following us too closely from one day to the next, where some South Africans believe there's a doomsday clock ticking for them. Indeed, the earlier resilience that I noted has a darker side, as some of these stories show. The residential segregation of the old apartheid era, inducing ethnic insularity, and that brought a place like Chatsworth into being, forged a distinctive identity that separated and continues at times to separate us from them, and all from becoming one of a living crowd, to use the quote from Walt Whitman, quoted by Kovadia. So while we engage in reflective nostalgia, which lingers on the ruins, the patina of time and history, in the dream of another place and another time, as Jacob Dlamini has reminded us in Native Nostalgia, his wonderful book about his years at Katlehong, and sometimes evoking a golden age. Living in the present and into the future might not be so easy, but must become the new imperatives. At the end of the day, we have to ask, what is the purpose of dwelling in the house, as Edward Said would have said, or the houses of the past, our apartheid past, as we do through books such as this? This time of memory is not to inhabit the prison houses of the past or to seek a transcendence in the past. It is rather to open the windows and doors of our houses in the present moment, to redefine and give brave expression to what true community is, to adamantly refuse the dispossession of our very humanity, our very souls that lingers, that had been wrought by apartheid. This time of memory is not to recount a past time of expansiveness against incredible odds, but to live now in new enclosures, to inculcate a shrinking or a miniaturization of identities, to use a term from Amartya Sen. Tagore expressed it poetically when he wrote, "Strike at the root of penury in my heart," as does Professor Becky Peterson when he writes of the intimacies of our separateness, both past and present. If we knew freedom in a time of unfreedom, as so many of the stories in Chatsworth, the making of a South African Township show, how do we create or nurture freedom in our time of freedom? Reflecting on the notion of meta-history, I'm coming to the end. Reflecting on the notion of meta-history, we need to ask, what future do we need? What past do we narrate? What past do we narrate for the future we should see come into being? I wish to congratulate our authors for producing a book that pushes me to ponder over these things. Can we give to Ashwin and Ghulam, who's not here, a round of applause? In conclusion, Frans Fanon criticizes the native intellectual who wishes to attach himself to the people, but instead he only catches hold of their outer garments. Fanon had urged that we train our eyes to the hidden and obscured places where the people dwell. And he writes, "It is to this zone of occult instability where the people dwell that we must come. And it is there that our souls are crystallized and that our perceptions and our lives are transfused with light." Fanon had also urged that native intellectuals delve into the past in order to construct the future as an invitation to action and as a basis for hope. In their remarkable compendium, Chatsworth, the Making of a South African Township, Ashwin Desai and Ghulam Vahed have come to the zone of occult instability, where the people dwell, and catch in these stories much more than the outer garments of a multitude of worthy Chatsworthians. Indeed, this book is a good example of merging a spontaneous sociology of the people, gossip, that Pierre Bourdieu, the French philosopher's sociologist, spoke of, where academics and intellectuals do not stand aloof behind ivory towers, but bear on their shoulders the weight of the world. I thank you. Can I give the books now?
Take your seats. Now don't worry, it's dark here. You know I escort Jalada. Take your seats. You check. You know South Africa, they got the largest population of Indians outside of India. Hey, charos, coolies, curry munchers, whatever you want to call us. Let me tell you something. Most of us, we descend or we reside right here in Chatsworth. And you know what? This museum here and its installation, it's dedicated to all the hundreds amongst the thousands of people who walk the streets of Chatsworth. What you tuning Madam Tussauds? Madam Tussauds takes a back seat, man, compared to the characters that driving the installation in this museum. Check me. I'm going to show you all these characters here. You know why? Because me, I'm the Honda. I said my 11 Chatsworth shelters came away. Let me tell you something. We call Chatsworth our homes, right? But the apartheid government, they thought it would best suit us life if they relocated us once again into the township called Chatsworth. It wasn't so bad, man. Let me tell you, semi-detached houses, council flats, hey, we turned that thing into homes. Homes. They were bursting at the seams. But it was enough to house our large families. Hey, you find characters roaming the units in Chatsworth, does he? Yeah, what? We don't have road names. We got units and we got road numbers. Check. That's why Shallcross Charos, they think they are upper class. You know what? They got road names. Class, education, religion, sport. It was all thrown in the mix and onto the fire. Hey, but you check us. We spark our fires. You know why? We boil water on the fire. Food on the fire. Plus, we even walk on the fire. To cleanse our souls, okay? And there's no one that can cook a curry like a charo. Hot, spicy, and comforting. Hey, you won't be short of food if you come to Chatsworth, Gazi. From the poorest of the poor. The schools got feeding schemes. The religious places are all feeding the poor people there. Plus, we're not short of temples, mosques, churches. Hey, we got plenty, man. You know why? We smart to cleanse our soul, you see. Because we don't want our next life to be as difficult as this one. Hey, let me tell you something. Chatsworth, it's not just a township built on farmlands. We got a second chance in Chatsworth. And boy, have we grabbed it. We got over 50 years of history. Yeah, and let me tell you, when you come to Chatsworth, you feel the magic. You just drive through the Evenson. You feel the magic of Chatsworth. You feel the warmth. Hey, everybody's welcome in Chatsworth, man, rich or poor. You all welcome there, must come there. Must come check it out. Like, you know, Madiba, he was the first president, our beloved Madiba, that came to visit us in Chatsworth. You know what? It was the Chatsworth magic that brought him there. And let me tell you something. That's the same magic that inspired him to build the youth center. And he was a man who was a firm believer of second chances. Now these characters here in this museum, they're going to share some of the Chatsworth magic with you. Maybe you might find yourself on an inner circle bus roaming the streets. Yeah. Hey, but you know one thing, Chatsworth people, they work hard. They build up their businesses, plus they like to spoil themselves. Hey, but they smart their fashion too. But one thing, we had our tragedies in Chatsworth, like the 70s and the 80s, the violence between the blacks and the Indians, gang wars throughout the years that led to the Dre Boys. What about our taxi violence, bus wars? We got gambling schools in every street corner, guys. Must come check it out. Who can forget the Throb incident that killed so many innocent lives, just because of competing nightclub owners? Hey, but you know what I say? I say the worst tragedy that hit Chatsworth was bell-bottoms and moustaches. Hey, we spark our fashion, right? Plus, we got fashion from blinged-up kurtas to shararas, and we got Sebago shoes, Pringle shirts. Hey guys, if I don't get it in 6 months, you get to pay each. But I think the bell-bottoms and the moustaches, I went hand in hand with the Beatles. They all used to sing that song that they became popular because of Chatsworth. They used to sing the song, yeah. It was a hard day's night, people working like dogs. But when I get on to you, I find the things that you do makes me feel alright. Hey, but it's not chucking down the stool, right? Now you are. Let me introduce you to some of the other characters in this installation, because they're gonna definitely take you on an inner circle ride. Check it out. I wake up before the dawn has even broken. The sun is yet to awaken the sleeping heads resting in front of me. But by the time the sun peeps over the ocean, I would have already gone and washed the clothes from the previous day, fetched water from down the road, cleaned my 2-bedroom house, and readied myself for a arduous day of work selling vegetables. That's my job, Monday to Friday. On weekends, I clean people's houses. While many are still in the land of slumber, dreaming of better days, I have already finished my first job. I also wash and I iron clothes for members in my community. I charge half cent a bundle. In the week, my 3 jobs give me 50 pence. It was enough then to put a roof over my head and feed my 6 children. The early morning mist, I walked 2 kilometers to the barracks to sell vegetables. Easy it was then to go to work in the barracks. Walking distance. You must be asking, why I'm killing myself like this? Why I'm working so hard? See, our lives was different. Our husbands just came, made babies, and they went away. Who are we gonna complain to? The person sitting next to you is in the same boat as you. What you gonna do? That time, the men could do 2 things. They could go to work, or they could go fight in the struggle. My husband, he went to fight in the struggle. The day he was arrested and taken to jail, I didn't know nothing. I didn't know why he went. While he was incarcerated in prison, I was a slave to work. Every day, I go to work in the barracks, selling vegetables. I won't forget the names, so many names. Ding Dong, Blue Soap Barber. Everybody knew his blue soap. Then there was somebody whose name was Double Engine. The characters. You know why his name was Double Engine? Because he put his fire extinguisher in 2 garages. The day the first wife found out about the second wife, she made sure that the whole street saw how she chased him with a broomstick and his pants down his ankles. These days, we see things like this, we don't flinch. Because just the other day, Kudinaka Kolamberi, he was chased down the street with his pants down his ankles. Only difference, his wife had a car. Some of these names, these characters, their names match their personality. Like Squirrel, he was a parapandita. But the moment the first punch was thrown, he scurried off hiding under his wife's father. Window Mary. Window Mary used to tell all the stories. She knew who was having breakfast, what you cooked, who got fired, who was having an affair with everybody. But you know, not only the men made a name for themselves in the barracks, the women made a name for themselves too. Like Bully Atta. When Bully Atta picked up a sari to come and fight with you, when she ate you, you think 10 men were eating you. And then there was me, Mariamma, the vegetable auntie. That's what everybody knew me as, the vegetable auntie. My 3 jobs was enough to support my 6 children, even without my husband. But when the Group Areas Act came, they shipped us off by the busloads to Chatsworth. Very far it was to go to work. I had to take the bus then. No other means of getting to the barracks. More than half my money was spent on traveling to go to work. I did it. It was very hard. I tried my best because I wanted all my children to go to school. There are many decisions I made that was not good. I had to put myself through the shame of remarriage. And then we moved to Unit 11. They gave us 2-bedroom house. Even after I remarried, times were still hard. And when 2 more children came, I too then had to make my eldest daughter go to work. I made her go wash her 9 clothes on weekends because I knew her education was important. My husband knew I remarried. What he's going to do? He knew someone had to support his children. I too then joined the ranks of Indians with tattoos. We didn't just put tattoos for the sake of putting it. We put it because it had meaning. We wanted to show our hopes, what we were feeling, our suffering. Mine says born to suffer. These days, everybody's putting tattoos for fashion. They don't know the sacrifices we went through, the hardships, my shame of remarriage, the burden of relocating, and the countless sunrises that I saw to ensure that my 11 children finished school and were educated, so that they will never see the words born to suffer in their lives.
One more, yeah. Wait so long to take. What is coming in between and I'm talking over here?
That was part of the plan.
I don't know whether he is a taxi chairman or what. Been waiting here so long for taxi, he's coming having his own ways here. You know, yesterday I went to hospital there. Hey, I have to go, you know what time I went to hospital? Oh, I went 5 o'clock in the morning. Take a taxi and go. Must take a taxi so early in the morning, otherwise I'll stand in the queue. Yeah, so long queue at the hospital. Hey, I never worry, you know what? I don't mind standing in the queue, but anyway, I got a contact in the hospital. I sent my scripts the day before. When I go to the hospital, the medicines are waiting for me. Yeah. And I took the taxi so early, hey, that taxi. Oh, no, the way that driver was motoring that taxi. He's saying 2-pack, drinking one 2-pack. I said, hey, when I finish with you, you need an ice pack. These days, the taxi drivers don't even have one steering wheel, but the music system is bumping. And the way they can tuck us like sardines, you sit next to each other, the other person switches on you. Hey. Anyway, you saw nowadays fashion they got, the rewind screen, that screen in the back. They got over there one dead person's name plastered. Hey, I don't want to be like Raj Bansi, Lenny Naidu and all that. I want to live to 66. Just now the way this driver is motoring, my name will be on the back of the taxi. Vandya Kandasamy. From Unit 6 man, no relation. Yeah, I stay there by ABH, nice place there. Hey, I'm sitting in the taxi here. One black fellow sitting next to me. I say, if I can help him off the taxi by RK cans. I told myself, I must help him out of the taxi by RK cans. I said, hey, what's wrong with you? He said, no, you are standing, ankle gave way. He fell down and cut open his foot back. And can't walk. I felt so sorry for him. I said, okay, never mind, I'll help him. I don't know where I grabbed the strength from. I carried him and I went to inside the hospital. We went in the hospital. How are they asking for 20 rand? He haven't got no money. I'm collecting grant. Now we have to 20 rand. Anyway, I gave the 20 rand to me from my grant money. I'm kind like that. I was feeling sorry for him. How are we standing over there now? This hospital don't know what they're doing. Are they guns? Sending us from location to location to location. And what you gonna do? Can't say nothing. They got a big sign over there saying waiting period 5 hours minimum. Who are you gonna complain to? Now they sent us emergency room. Oh, you're way in the emergency room. They're busy with somebody else. Now can't see to us. Must sit and wait. Now this fella came, got a big chop on his thigh there. Girlfriend caught him cheating. She took the chopper and chopped him. Another one, auntie came. Small daughter. She got 14-year-old daughter. Big stomach the daughter got. And she thinks the daughter got cramps. The nurse asked him so nicely, yeah, your daughter's pregnant. He said, no, my daughter don't go anywhere. Hey, that auntie got so angry, she came and sat next to us, right? She's telling me how the nurses can be so if a daughter pregnant, they don't let the daughter go anywhere. Oh, yo, 20 minutes later, the nurse coming back, she's saying, hey, your daughter got a daughter. She don't know what to do now. Because her husband's sitting in the car waiting for them. What you going to tell him? As for the other fella sitting next to me, his thigh is struggling, he's laughing at the auntie. I looked at him nicely. I said, hey, you mustn't laugh. You know why? If your girlfriend chopped you 6 inches higher, your bala will fall off. You would have been suffering then. Don't laugh at other people. We're waiting over here. You're not trying to entertain me. How the doctor came. Doctor telling us must go X-ray department. Bloody shit. Must go X-ray department now. So long we sitting here and this you now we must go follow that Q X-ray department. Why did they never tell us first time must go follow the Q X-ray department? For nothing we sat here now. We went by the X-ray department. Hey, the door is wide open there. Now that girl forgot to close it. I'm looking inside. I don't know whether she put film in the machine or she taking pictures one way. Then I see one sign there by the door. It says dangerous rays. Keep door closed at all times. She's sitting behind one glass there. I'm standing over here. She's saying, what protection I got? who we can talk to about this? Nobody? Now stand here and wait. Hey, she do the X-ray for this fella. Then she sent us back by the doctors. Oh, yo, this fella and I struggling, we're walking and going. He can't make it with his foot. Me, I got arthritis. Oh, I'm suffering. Not one wheelchair in this hospital. Can't find one wheelchair. Now we're going back by the doctor. Doctor not there, doctor gone. Must wait for another one, doctor. Nah? Oh, you're waiting for another one, doctor. I was talking to my friend, Sarah's hospital. She can't go by Chatsworth, man. Lani hospital. She don't go there, she come by Khan's. But you know one thing Sarah was saying was very right. She said, you know that Mr. Khan that built that APK Khan's hospital, what a legacy he left, isn't how hard he worked to build that hospital. You know APK Khan's was one of the 4 major hospitals in Durban. Very right that she was saying, one thing very right. And she's saying, look now today, what that man's legacy has gone to. One sign on the wall saying, minimum waiting period 5 hours. Oh, and young doctor came in, so young she is, so a small girl. She's coming to treat this fella next to me. She's looking at his foot, she's saying, hey, he needs stitches. I'm thinking, you're bloody shit, I could have told you that 4 hours ago. Why did you brought him in here? Because he needs stitches. Anyway, she's taking him and going, I'm watching her nicely. The way her hands are shaking like she got arthritis. Even give the anesthetic, the small girl, man, doctor she's calling herself. Can't give the anesthetic. This fella is holding my hand so tight. Oh, yo, I'm thinking he's going to amputate my hand. When she finished with him, she's telling us must go to dispensary to collect medicine. I said, what? Nah, I must follow another Q dispensary to go collect medicine, these medicines. I don't even come and follow Q to collect my medicine. I must go collect these medicines. I no more.
Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you. Rowan's been my stage director, and I'm sure he's going to kick my butt after this. I know he is. This was really just an absolute rough performance, and you're really getting a preview of it. There's so much more to it, so much humor, and truth in it, lots of history. Now, Rowan and I have been writing together. I spoke to Ashwin last year sometime and I asked for permission if I could write a play on his book and his writings because it was very close and dear to my heart. I'm formerly from Chatsworth and my granny told me stories all the time about Magazine Barracks. That's where my family was from and they moved to Chatsworth. When my granny died, my mother carried on with these stories. And when Ashwin was coming out with this book and I was reading about it all the time and following up, I thought, well, when my mother dies, I'm never going to hear these stories. And what's happening with our history? It's slowly being faded away. Our youth does not know where we've come from. They don't know the development that happened in Chatsworth, that it was first a farm, and look at what it is today. Would you believe that we did that? It's unbelievable that we had, back then, we were so involved in sport and music. What happened to it? My main reason behind doing this, well, there's lots of visions behind it, but one of the main reasons is to do this play. It's not about our name and fame.
It's about getting a message across and to get the right people involved so that a museum can be built in Chatsworth, where all of our history can be recorded. And when we are not here tomorrow, our youth will know where it started and how they got there. Because today, a lot of that history is sitting in people's homes. They've got some fantastic stories, many untold stories, photographs. All of that should be in a museum so that it can inspire many, many more people. Now, the characters that we've got are more than 10 characters with hilarious stories, and what's fantastic about it is every character is real. As you would have been hearing Betty tell you about Mariama and Sweetie and Chanel Pansami and whomever Ashwin mentioned, all of these characters are in the play. They're all real people that we've turned larger into life so that we can get a message across. I wish you could have heard the recordings. We did bring it, but sadly due to the technical side, there's much more to this production. When we do showcase it, it comes out with pictures and it has visuals as well as recordings. It's going to be an absolute blast. It's going to take South Africa by storm, and we've got a very big vision. It's going on a national tour, and we're doing whatever it takes to get it there. I have currently funded this by myself thus far, and to do the opening, I have gone in association with ABH, the Aryan Benevolent Homes, and the Nelson Mandela Youth Centre, which is in Chatsworth, and I'm launching the production in Chatsworth because of its significance to Chatsworth. Proceeds from this is going to those organizations for development in Chatsworth. But thereafter, it's going to go on a national tour. We need your support. We want to bring it to Johannesburg because lots of our Chatsworth residents are there in Lens now. So you want to remind them, hey, don't come here with your neck. We know where you're from.
Wow. Well, we're coming to a close, but now you can see why Jacob Zuma smarts the Charles. Make a baby and buy like the Charles. So anyways, firstly we want to say thank you to the library staff for hosting this. And Betty has a gift for Dr. Rukeya Bawa. Hope she's still here. Come, Rukeya. So the staff, the library staff and Dr. Rukeya have turned this place into something else, not just a place where you borrow books.